Indiana High School Basketball Tournament Series. The Butler Fieldhouse in Indianapolis is the scene of these final contests for the championship. WIRE with Tom Carnegie is one of the 48 radio stations covering the games.
Tom Carnegie came to Indiana from college in Missouri, and his first assignment in radio was the Indiana Boys Basketball State Tournament. And he had described to me that it was sort of love at first sight. And from there it blossomed. He was a part of it. He became the radio voice, the PA voice in later years, but he realized and he embraced what high school basketball meant to Indiana.
1942, I arrived on the scene of Indiana. College diploma in one hand and no idea what was going to happen in the other hand. And the first thing I found out about the high schools, some 700 of them at that time in the state of Indiana, were all basketball minded. Early on, I just couldn't understand why people were so passionate about high school basketball. But I soon learned it was the topic of conversation everywhere, in the smallest burg in the state, in the biggest high school. And I think it was because they were all shooting for one big trophy, and that was the state championship. And that's what was on everybody's mind. A sectional victory by a small school against a big school was just as important to them as the state championship.
What made you proud of Tom was he overcame a tragedy that he had happen in his young life when he had polio. And he was mobile, and yet he was limited in his mobility. You know, I heard that he was a good prospect as a catcher when he was in high school. And then I think that was about his junior year.
Well, Tom Carnegie was born with polio. His dream was to be a Major League Baseball player. He was a huge St. Louis Cardinals fan, and obviously that didn't work out. Then he realized he had this huge, booming voice, and he got into drama, was winning all these contests, got a job in Fort Wayne playing radio, came to Indianapolis, fell in love with Hoosier basketball, and he called the state finals for 40 consecutive years. He lived and breathed Indiana basketball.
He went to a school in Missouri. In fact, one of our ball players at Tech got a scholarship there, and I think it was probably through Tom. And this young man's name is now Otis Curry, and he's the athletic director at Northwest High School.
My coach, Jack Bradford, he came to me and said that Tom Carnegie wanted to take me and some other athletes from Indianapolis to visit his alma mater, William Jewell College. And I knew Tom from his broadcasting the state tournament for years and years, so you know that was an exciting moment for me. And we went to visit, and he provided the transportation and took care of all the expenses. And he took us out there, and we stayed a few days visiting with the athletes there and the coaches. And it was a really outstanding experience for me, you know, to visit a school, you know, where I could go and play basketball. You know, so I was one of the first in my family to go to college. So that was an outstanding opportunity for me. And I really enjoyed my visit, and I ended up attending William Jewell College. And I played basketball there, and I had an outstanding basketball career there.
Oh, well, probably next to my parents, Tom Carnegie had the most impact on my life. He was my mentor, a dear friend, family member for years. Probably talked to him once a week, every week, probably the past 30 years. And he had a huge passion for racing and basketball, Indiana basketball. He came here as a youngster and got caught up in Hoosier hysteria immediately, called the state finals for 40 consecutive years. And he was all about Indiana basketball. He would travel the state. He knew all the coaches, he knew all the players, he knew the athletic directors. He loved Indiana basketball. And one of the last things he got to do while he was living was to go to the Basketball Hall of Fame, go to the Hall of Fame Classic over the holiday. And that was a thrill for him, that the last thing he got to do out and about was the fact that he went to the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame Classic, which he started years ago. And he always cherished the thought that he was the guy who came up with the idea of having Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, and very proud of that his name will always be connected to Indiana basketball and the Hall of Fame in Newcastle.
He was also at our recent Hall of Fame Classic tournament in December here in Newcastle, and he came here and had a huge smile on his face. We had tremendous crowds, and he was so proud to see the crowds, the quality of competition, what that event meant to the Hall of Fame and to this community and statewide on the high school basketball landscape.
I took the Wabash Railroad from Kansas City, Missouri to Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I got my very first job. I had the diploma. I had an interest in what they were doing at Fort Wayne, but beyond that, I wound up doing 6 games in one day. I know I didn't do it well because I really didn't realize they were going to play sectional games right there in Fort Wayne, and they were the biggest sports story of that community that year and every year. Then Murray Mendenhall and Central High School led his team to the state tournament. And I saw immediately in my very first year what the state championship means to a city, meant to Fort Wayne. And I wanted to preserve that feeling by starting the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame. And we're succeeding.
Tom's passion for Indiana high school basketball showed through at all times. From the creation of the Hall of Fame to his involvement at the state tournament and his evolving role at the Hall of Fame. It struck me that when he came from Missouri, he realized what a special, unique tradition Indiana high school basketball was. And I don't think it's overstepping it to say that Indiana high school basketball is a part of the culture of our state and our people. And he saw that, and he realized that, and he saw the void that was there for recognizing those coaches and players and teams, etc., that had had such a great impact on their communities and on the state as a whole. And I think that that's why the formation of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame was such a success. Also, with Tom Carnegie behind it, it was going to be a success.
My first association was back when I first went to Tech High School, and they started to have the sectional at Hinkle Fieldhouse, and they had to put up a big bay of lights up above, real bright lights, to get the right illumination for the TV. And then I got to know him down through there, and he would come out to Tech once in a while.
I think Tom Carnegie really cemented his spot on the Indiana high school basketball landscape when he and Tony Hinkle and Herb Schwollmeyer became a part of that WFBM telecast of the state finals and the state tournament. And folks turned on their television expecting to hear that voice, wanting to know what was going on. And I think that group really helped popularize Indiana high school basketball when television was becoming a mainstream media. And I think once he was there with Coach Hinkle and with Herb Schwollmeyer, that helped further that message of his love, his passion, and his knowledge of Indiana high school basketball.
I started working at Channel 6 in 1982, and that's the first time I got to meet Tom Carnegie in person. And if someone can be imposing sitting down, Tom Carnegie was, and that's because of that enormous bass and bellowing voice that he had. And it gave him a presence like nobody else had.
Tom's voice had an atmosphere like E.F. Hutton. When E.F. Hutton spoke, everybody listened. And that's the same way with Tom's voice.
Let's go back again now for the introduction of the starting lineups.
Presenting the starting lineup of the two teams vying for the state championship. First, the Tigers of Warsaw.
You know, I think it's a tremendous asset that he was in the movie Hoosiers. Again, that is a voice that's so synonymous with Indiana, and for him to be in that movie, the movie that portrays Indiana high school basketball better than any other, it's apropos. It fits. He's the right guy, and they cast him perfectly.
The starting lineup
But the one moment that stands out was 2 or 3 weeks into my beginning here, when Tom picked up the phone and called me and wanted to know in that deep baritone voice, how are things at the Hall of Fame? That was a goosebump moment, and he was the Tom Carnegie, and he cared deeply about what was going on and how things were going at the Hall of Fame, and that meant a lot to me personally.
Very humble man. He was a Hoosier. He wasn't from Indiana, but he had those Hoosier values. That's what Tom Carnegie was about. A gracious man, would give you the shirt off his back. It was never about Tom Carnegie. He didn't want to be the story. He was there to promote whatever the story was. If it was Indiana basketball, he was there to promote Indiana basketball. It wasn't about him. He just happened to be along for the ride and enjoyed every minute of it. He valued people and stories and cherished those memories of meeting all these basketball players and coaches through the years and those relationships.
When I used to send my mail, I would include a stick of Juicy Fruit gum in all my mail. And one time I got a letter back from Carnegie, and he wanted to know if I was mad at him because he said there wasn't a stick of gum in that letter. And I got a kick out of that he'd take that time to do that.
And as a kid, that was the voice that let me know it was March and that there was some unbelievable talent playing high school basketball at Hinkle Fieldhouse, because he would do sectionals, regionals, semi-states, and then the state. And if you're of that era, you know that he did all the games with Tony Hinkle. But there were certain Tom Carnegie calls like, "Hey," scores, that let you know what you were watching. And when you would run outside and play right after one of those games, you were pretending like it was Tom Carnegie making the call of you winning the state championship in Indiana.
Tom Carnegie founded the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame in 1962. And as we approach our 50-year anniversary, our organization has grown tremendously and our facilities have grown and improved tremendously. And as we look into the future, I can only hope that we are upholding Tom's wishes of preserving the heritage of Indiana high school basketball and at the same time cultivating that interest in the next generation of Indiana basketball fans.
Well, my past with Tom Carnegie goes way back in time. I've been a good friend of his over the years, and he's been such a good friend to Indianapolis, but certainly to Indiana basketball. My association with Tom goes back to when I was coaching high school basketball in the last 30 years. And his voice would just, you could hear it from miles away or on TV, and you know right away that it was Tom Carnegie. So he's going to be missed. Indianapolis loves him, and his voice and his name and his appearance will be around here forever.
The thing about Tom Carnegie to me is that he was so woven in the fabric of high school basketball is that his voice is synonymous to me with obviously not just the 500 and being out at the track, but with high school basketball as well. As much as I think of the great moments of Hoosier high school basketball and what that history always brings to you as far as your memory is concerned, you know, that steady voice, that voice of Tom Carnegie always rings true when you're thinking of boys high school basketball. I mean, Tom Carnegie, the basketball itself, the rims, the backboard, I mean, it's all a part of the fabric of what most of us grew up being a part of, and it's something that we'll absolutely miss.
I was privileged to be a participant in Mr. Hinkle's funeral at the Fieldhouse. And on that day, the Fieldhouse said goodbye to its very best friend. And now just recently, we have lost another dear friend that the Fieldhouse enjoyed so much, and his voice will be echoed forever in that famous building.
And Tom, you know, he's always been a supporter of high school basketball, and you know, and his passion for basketball will be sorely missed.
Well, Tom Carnegie was a legend in Indiana high school basketball history. He will never be forgotten, and we certainly will miss and cherish all those great memories from Tom Carnegie.